and global NGOs. He holds the Sidney Ermas Adjunct Chair in Jewish Law and Ethics at Loyola Law School, is a co-principal in Jewish Mediation Service. So that means a lot, I suppose, from the story that you told us a few minutes ago. Jewish Mediation Service, which applies a Jewish ethical approach to problem solving, which is very, very important nowadays. Rabbi Adlerstein is a contributing editor to Quarterly Jewish Action, maintains a column on Potios, and is the founding and senior editor of the Cross Currents, a popular Orthodox blog of Torah and current affairs. His op-eds have appeared in many print and digital outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Jerusalem Post, and Christianity Today. He lectures extensively in both Christian and Jewish communities, and now has come to lecture at an institute that is founded by Turkish Americans, Muslims. We can add to your bio, and has authored several books on Rabbinic Judaism. Please help me welcome Rabbi Adlerstein.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. And forget everything else that I'm about to say tonight. We've discovered what Jews and Muslims really have in common. We start 10 minutes late. So you like the license plate. I think the time I enjoyed driving with that license plate the most was at the end of Ramadan. I was invited to an iftar at the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City, and I pulled into the lot. So I have a picture of that car with "I Love Torah" parked in front of the King Fahd Mosque, with one of the shaking hands across the license plate. You know, it was a big problem for them inviting my colleague Rabbi Cooper and myself. How do you invite a couple of Orthodox Jews to an iftar at a mosque? Inviting them is not the problem, but what do you serve? Because we're kosher, you're halal, it's not quite the same. Our rules are even stricter than yours. So only in America could you find a solution like this. Muslims invite Jews. What do? You send out for Chinese. That's what happened. We had kosher Chinese food. We have a whole bunch of Chinese restaurants, kosher Chinese restaurants here. You should know about them because they are all halal, so you can enjoy them as well. But speaking about China, you know the one about this American professor who was invited to speak someplace deep in China, and when he got the invitation, he said, "I'd love to come, but I don't speak a word. I don't speak Cantonese. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't speak any of the 20 other languages there. How am I going to function?" She said, "It's no problem. It's no problem. You speak, and every couple of minutes we'll have a translator." So he comes, and he starts his lecture, and he says one sentence, and the translator waves him on. Okay, he keeps on going, waves him on, keeps on waving him on. 15 minutes later, the translator signals him to stop, says a couple of brief words, and then tells him to keep on going. So he goes for another 15 minutes. Translator says stop, also says a few words. 15 minutes later, again. And at the end of the hour lecture, one last time. So the professor said, "This is amazing. I mean, I don't know anything about any of the Chinese languages, but it's amazing how you can take 15 minutes worth of complicated material and just in a couple of phrases." He said, "No, it's very simple. After 15 minutes, I told the crowd, he hasn't said anything yet. After 30 minutes, I said, he still hasn't said anything. 15 minutes later, I said, you know, I don't think the guy's going to say anything at all. And after an hour, I said, I was right." So I hope this is not going to be the same way. I was already introduced. I am the director of Interfaith Affairs for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is the largest Jewish membership organization in North America, maybe the world, with over 400,000 paying member families. We're an international NGO. A good part of our activity has nothing to do with the Jewish community, except in the sense that as victims of lots and lots of history, we're sensitive to other injustices. So we've been heavily invested in North Korea and the crimes that are being perpetuated there. We're one of the first organizations to continue pushing for better treatment for persecuted Christians around the world. I'm delighted to be here. I'll speak openly. I'm not so sure I could travel to Istanbul today. But you should know that I'm coming to you as an Orthodox Jew. We are much more into history and memory than other Jews. History for us becomes a mitzvah, a commandment. And that means that my kids know that in 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella threw the Jews out of Spain, where did Jews go? The ones who survived. They went to Turkey. There were two destinations that accepted them, Turkey and Amsterdam. And Turkey took more. And that led to a soft spot until just the last couple of years in the hearts of Jews. So we have gratitude, and I'm happy to be here, at least in part, trying to pay back a debt of 500 years. I'm going to try to keep my remarks to about a half an hour. I think that was a suggestion, and then take questions. You'll probably gain a lot more from firing or peppering me with as many questions as you can. I'm going to talk about two things, really: interfaith, multifaith, and then a little bit about Orthodox Judaism and Orthodox Jews. You're not going to hear what you expected. I imagine lots of people have stood before you and talked about the value of interfaith dialogue and interfaith work, and it's all very good. It's not my bag. It's not my bag, even though I'm the director of Interfaith Affairs. I'll tell you why. The difference between interfaith and multifaith is sort of the following. There's lots of value in interfaith, but there are some downsides. Interfaith in America really took off after the Holocaust, fed a lot by Christian guilt over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of the run-up to the Holocaust, and Christians felt that they had to look at Jews in a different way. What a lot of interfaith activity really meant was people who really, out of the goodness of their heart, felt that they should be more open and accommodating to other people, getting together, discussing lots of things, and taking a lot of pictures. It's a lot about photo ops. It didn't necessarily get down to grassroots level. It could be that a pastor who was in it talked about his friendship with other Jews. It didn't mean that people in this congregation were striking up friendships. And same thing on the rabbi's side. Multifaith is different. Multifaith means that we're not going to sit together and take out a text from the New Testament or the Quran or Hebrew Scripture and trade each other's reactions to them and see how we can lighten each other, or talk about parallels so that there can be a cross-fertilization. Cross-fertilization is wonderful. It really is. But it doesn't work for all groups. There are lots of religious groups out there who are very reluctant to be part of that. Why? For better or for worse, there are lots of religious groups that have a very firm and confident belief in their own protocols, in their own approach to holy texts, and they can kind of smile benignly when somebody says, "Oh, that's so interesting. I would have thought that this should be interpreted that way." Yes, that's very nice. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. But they're not really open to being enlightened by people who don't share the core values, the history, the approach to text. So are they left out of the whole process? So we would argue 100% not. Multi-faith means that you take people of different faiths who are not trying to influence each other, even to coordinate or show the commonality, but use the value of faith itself, the power of faith to accomplish certain things. It is a truism that in America, people of faith give more charity than people who are not affiliated with religious groups. It is true that people who are affiliated with faith groups give more time in voluntarism. You can marshal the power of commitment to faith for people whose faiths collide theologically, but have in common the idea that we are all answerable to God, and God expects us to do certain things, and you pool that power to do for each other, for the community, for the world as a whole, and that's a very powerful thing. If I had more time, I could give you examples. I will just hint at one. I don't know where you are politically on Iran, but not so many years ago, you may remember there was almost a revolution in the streets of Iran after one election. Not so sure that the United States didn't blow the opportunity, but the neighborhood that you're in, if you take a look at Google Maps, has a name. It's not always called Westwood. Google Maps gives it another name. It's called Tehrangeles. Tehrangeles. There are more Iranian expats here than any other place in the world. And these groups were clamoring for a voice. They wanted to speak to the American people. None of them had experience and none of them had connections to the media. So ironically, the Museum of Tolerance, led by a bunch of Orthodox rabbis with yarmulkes on their heads, called a news conference so that a whole group of Iranian Muslims got up. Some of them were communists, some of them were monarchists, some of them, you had every group there, but they all stood up and they got the coverage. That to us shows the power of faith. We understood what they were going through, and they were able to use our experience and our resources for something that happened to be good for their group. We thought good for America and for the world. There are lots of advantages like that. There are other points to this multicultural, multi-faith rather than interfaith. Let's get real. The history of intergroup dynamic between the three monotheistic religions is not always so pretty, right? Every one of those three groups can claim a rich history of getting slaughtered by at least one of the others. I think Jews did a lot less of the slaughtering. Maybe we never had the opportunity, but whatever it is, that's the truth. Christians massacring Muslims, Muslims massacring Christians. It's all part of the history. But you know, for lots of the history of hundreds and hundreds of years, I'm not defending it. It's an awful, awful thing. But if you had to describe the reason for it, why all of this took place, it's because religion was taken seriously by people. And we know the worst kinds of feuds are feuds within the family. The worst kind of hatred is with people who turn on each other when they're related and when they're when they're closer together. That's where you find the worst animosity and the worst hatred. Because the three monotheistic religions were so close to each other in many regards, it became so important for each one of them to say, no, that group is blaspheming and they're infidels. They had to show the difference between their true religion and the falsity of the other. I can understand that. But besides everything else that we find abhorrent about it, something has really changed in the Western world. And that is, the issue is no longer, do Muslims have the truth? Do Christians have the truth? Do Jews have the truth? There's a different kind of intellectual struggle that's been going on since the time of the Enlightenment, since almost 500 years, and certainly picked up steam. A couple of years ago, there were, in the space of a few months, 3 or 4 books on the New York Times bestseller list, devoted to the new atheism. The new atheism. Anybody who doesn't realize how atheism has come back with a vengeance, with this idea, sometimes made explicit, sometimes not so explicit. Those who understand have no need for religion. Religion is for those who are uncomprehending, who don't have enough background in science, who are groping for answers. Those of us who understand don't need religion. The number of scientists, the percentage of scientists, the Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Sciences over the last 50, 60 years, the number who profess belief in religion has remained the same. It's a minority. But the number of top scientists, winners of Nobel Prizes and field medals and things like that, religious belief keeps declining. There's dangerous stuff going on. You look around the world, and there are more and more people who call themselves agnostic or atheist, but not just the question of, I'm rooting for the Seahawks, I'm rooting for the I'm rooting for the Patriots. It's not like rooting for a different team, but convicted atheism, detesting religion, with the idea that those who are religious are intellectually inferior. So people can go on fighting the battles of 500 years ago, or they can wake up to the reality that what we really need, if we're serious about securing a place for God in this world, is to work with people who take God very seriously and work hand in hand, despite the differences, to convince our neighbors, our children, and sometimes ourselves that this is for real. And that's the other part of multifaith. That because of this change in the intellectual climate, we really should be thinking through who our friends and allies ought to be, even if they weren't in the past. It's not difficult for me at all to come to before a group of, looks like primarily Muslims. As I said to a few in the room before, it's easier for me to speak to religious Muslims, observant Muslims, than it is to speak to secular Muslims, because instantly I have something in common. Okay, it's true. There's an elephant in the room. We're not going to talk about it. There's politics, there's territory, there's a conflict in the Middle East. If you can push that aside, and somebody mentioned Yossi Klein Halevi before, who did it for a number of years, and others in Israel who've reached out to major imams. If there's anything that's going to clear up a conflict even there, it may be people of faith who have a common vocabulary. Not agreement, but a common vocabulary of what it means to be created in the image of God and to carry his name into society. Okay, that's the first half. Second half, Orthodox Jews. Who are we? This is going to be simpler than you think. In the popular mindset, there are three kinds of affiliated Jews. The majority of Jews in America are affiliated with no religious group. Jews are the most unchurched, sorry for the verb, or the adjective, whatever it is, the most unchurched group, adjective, in America. Of those who do affiliate, you have three major groups: Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. Reform is sort of like what Protestants were to Catholics. They shed much of tradition, and they basically took what was a legal tradition. Judaism always was a system of law, lots of laws, and turned it into, fuzzy beliefs and some customs and nothing normative, nothing binding. Reform is very, very upfront about that. There is nothing that is demanded because we don't have any confidence in any revelation of God that we are secure about. So they're traditions, they're nice, they enrich, but nothing is binding. Conservative was founded as a reaction to how far reform had gone. It was only started a few decades before the turn of the 20th century. They became the largest of the three religious movements, and they are on the verge of extinction. They, in all likelihood, will not be here 10, 20 years from now. Synagogues are closing in droves. Once were the most popular, but they can't hold their children. Both Reform and Conservative have population rates well below ZPG. ZPG, zero population growth. In order to maintain a population, how many children you need per family? 2.5? 2.1. Right. I always wondered who the person was who had the 0.1 child. But you need 2.1 because, there's some people who don't get married or can't have kids. So you need, on the average, 2.1 children just to maintain a population. Europe is disappearing because there's no European country that is anything close to 2.1. In the West, the United States and Canada are above it, and so is Israel. But other than that, it's bad news for populations that have lasted for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But in addition to that, Reform and Conservative kids don't marry other Jews. They marry out at greater than 50%. So both of them, it's only a matter of time. I don't say this with pride. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, but they can't last. Meanwhile, the Orthodox today are about 10% of the Jewish population, and they were always predicted to be the group that could not last. These are the old-timers from Europe. You saw them in Fiddler on the Roof and pictures of the shtetl back in Europe. But in America, in a free country with options, they can't last. Well, we surprised everybody. We did last. And listen carefully, because everything, if you are an observant Muslim, everything that happened to Orthodox Jews is directly germane about the way you will survive as a community if you are intent on surviving. Because everything that we went through, you're going to go through. Every mistake that we made, you're going to make unless you learn from our example. So we weren't supposed to last, but we came back gangbusters. Today, in the latest polls, if you measure the youngest cohort that's measured in the major polls, 20 to 35, Orthodox are already the largest. We have, I remember I got a call years ago from CBS. They wanted to do a show, or a segment of a show on large families. So, we had a couple of, I guess, some media connections. I have more IMDb credits than most of the would-be actors that come to my house. So they called and they said, Rabbi, you got 8 children. Can we do a segment? We're doing a story on large families. I said, why are you coming to us? I said, because you have 8 children. I said, in my neighborhood, that's a small family. Okay, it's an average family, but the families with a lot more kids than that, and not on the reality shows. So we hope, with the help of God, that we'll be around. Where do we stand? We believe that Judaism is a system of law. We believe that God revealed himself to man, that God does more than make suggestions. He actually has demands, that he rewards, he punishes, that the Torah was authored by God, given by God to man, and it represents the way we're supposed to live. We believe, contrary to some of our competitor religions, that we do not have the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Jews never claimed for themselves an exclusive. They always taught, and I'll show you the source, right back in the Talmud, that the righteous of the nations of the world get heaven, get eternity. They don't have to and are not encouraged to practice the laws of the Torah. We don't proselytize because we don't believe that non-Jews need the Torah. We believe that they need 7 laws called the Noahide laws. That makes them righteous people, and they get into heaven easier than Jews who have to keep 613. 613, though, is only for starters. Those are the major categories straight from the Torah. 248 affirmative obligations, 365 proscriptions, do-nots. 365, does that conjure up anything? Days of the year. The idea that the totality of time is bound by limits and restrictions. Life is a dangerous place. It's a great place, but it's full of pitfalls and pratfalls. And God, as a loving Father, keeps us away from the things that will bring us down spiritually. 248 corresponds roughly to, depending on how you count them, different parts of the body, especially as they were seen in the ancient world. And it's the idea that every commandment that a person does brings him or her closer to what God is. You become closer to God in the process of living by being faced with many, many, many challenges each and every day, and living by these small decisions and making the right ones gradually turns you into a different person and brings you closer to God. Law encompasses everything, everything. When I step into my classroom at Loyola and try to introduce them to the idea of Jewish law, many of the students in this semester, most of my students aren't Jewish, I ask them, why don't Jews celebrate Christmas? Somebody help me along. Why don't Jews celebrate Christmas?
They don't see Jesus as the Son of God.
Yeah, that's what most people think. That's the wrong answer. I'll tell you why. The reason why Jews don't celebrate Christmas is because if Jews were supposed to celebrate Christmas, there would be a tractate in the Talmud. Talmud's the most important book of the what we call the oral law, the interpretation of the law that we see as a parallel document, a process to understand what the written text is. There would have to be a whole section specifying how tall a Christmas tree is, how many branches it has, how many decorations you have to put on every branch. And finally, most importantly, if you can fulfill the mitzvah of having a Christmas tree by borrowing one from your Christian friend for 8 days and returning it later. Since there is no such tractate, Jews don't celebrate Christmas. Okay, what's my point? We have laws, we have detailed laws for everything. That's not very popular in America. Happens to be that among observant Muslims, that idea resonates. The idea that God actually may ask you to do things in a specified way at every moment of your life is not foreign to Muslims at all. Paul, one of the first apostles, wasn't so keen on the idea. But that's not strange to Muslims at all. One of the things that animates us is the study of the Torah. Our study is not just memorizing texts. We don't really go in for memorization. It is plumbing the depths of text. If you ever step into a legitimate Jewish school, especially adults, you will find the cacophony of voices of people yelling and screaming at each other about whose interpretation is the right one of every line of every text. Jews question a lot. That doesn't mean that they don't keep the answers within certain boundaries, but they do question a lot, they inquire, and study is done for the sake of study itself, not just to find out how to live your life, what the rules are. That already you can get when you're a kid. But the rest of it is to try to understand, as it were, the mind of God, which we see written into the Torah. A part of Jewish living that we would never be able to survive without is Shabbat, is our holy day. Here, somehow, it doesn't seem that Muslims have anything comparable. Christians used to have the Lord's Day on Sunday, which they kept as a holy day the entire day. Shabbat for us every week is 25 hours. Guests to our house, and we always have guests at our house. Occasionally we have some Jews over. More often than not, it's a mixture of Jews and non-Jews, but to them, it seems like Jews do Thanksgiving once a week. Our meals go on for 4 or 5 hours every Friday night. People are not only involved in conversation, but the study of Torah. Every week has a different Torah portion. You'll find 3, 4 generations animatedly discussing ideas. One of the last places in America where you can still get people in a family to talk to each other. The complete opposite of a Woody Allen movie. But it works. One of the reasons why Orthodox Jews made it to this point, transplanted the religion, and the religion is thriving, is because we insisted on our own schools. Here I have to tell you, I simply cannot understand Muslims in America who have built schools generally for children of what age? Elementary school. And just when hormones start to rage, they let them loose in public schools. Ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work. It's just not. Trust me. We've been there. An area of particular commonality is the nature of God. One of our most important codifiers of the law and philosophers was Maimonides. Maimonides was influenced by Ibn Rushd. He wrote his most famous philosophical work in Arabic, in Hebrew was called Moreh Nevuchim, or Guide to the Perplexed, but it was in response to a Muslim form of Neo-Aristotelianism in his time, in the 11th and 12th century. He suffered a lot from Muslim extremists. He was born in Spain, and after everybody else around was slaughtered by the Almohads, his family had enough, and they decided to put as much distance between themselves and the extremists of the time, and they crossed the Mediterranean to North Africa. Their luck, a couple of months later, the Almohads followed, and they literally lived in caves for a while. They did come out of the caves. Some of the Jews in the caves in the Atlas Mountains stayed in those caves and had a civilization there until the establishment of the State of Israel. But Maimonides, who suffered greatly from Muslim extremists, wrote not very kindly about Christianity. He was not a great favor of any kind of Trinitarian belief. And Muslims who persecuted him and killed out everybody he knew, he said, they believe in a unity of God that's a real unity, that has no fault lines in it. Ironically, that should be a basis of not only multi-faith cooperation, but real commonality. The idea that behind everything lurks a real understanding of the absolute unity of God. So let me just conclude by saying, why should you know? Why should you care? The primary reason is that people should not have to reinvent the wheel. We've been here in a secular society dealing with the challenges of trying to live in two worlds at the same time, as everybody in this room is doing. We know the danger zones. We know what things work somewhat, what things work a little better. It would be a great thing if you would borrow some of those things, at least listen to the voices of people who've been there before. What happens when your kids come home from school and they have friends who are not observant or not Muslim, and they want to go to a party or this or that? How do you deal with that? We have the experience. I've offered it in the past. I will tell you quite openly that every time that I've offered it, the response that I got is, Rabbi, it would be great, but we're not ready yet to listen to Jews. Well, someday that may change. When it happens, we'll be there. And in the meantime, maybe we can build up a little bit of a relationship at a time with more understanding and getting to know each other a little better.